Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast. This week we're talking to Gib Bulloch, who is a self-described corporate insurgent. He's had a distinguished first part of his career at blue chip companies such as BP, Mars, and Accenture. And over the last few years, and even before that, during his time at Accenture, he's been disrupting pretty much everything he could find in his path. So Gib, welcome.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Claire.
So it's a great pleasure to have you here. You're speaking to us from your home in Switzerland, I think?
Yes, I'm based in Geneva, so Scotsman in Geneva.
In lockdown.
Just coming in, well, just starting to come out of lockdown here, actually, which is, it's actually bittersweet. I must admit, maybe I'm the odd one out, but I've quite enjoyed the tranquility and the lack of traffic in the streets and the lack of planes in the sky. But I think, businesses have been suffering, and it's good to see that they're starting to start up again.
Excellent, good. I must say, I rather share your sense of the peace and the enjoyment of this strange confined period. Anyway, let's get on with it a little bit. In your website, it says that you visited over 90 countries, you've climbed Kilimanjaro, and you've got a black belt in a particularly special kind of Kung Fu. That's an impressive list. Do tell us more.
Abstract things. The countries, I guess, having worked in international development for over 15 years or so, a lot of my life was spent on planes. Don't ask me about my carbon footprint because it would be embarrassingly high. But yes, much of these would be a few days trips here and there. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about my time living in the Balkans and living in London and now living in Switzerland. But seeing a lot of the world, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, particularly more developing economies, was certainly interesting. The Kilimanjaro was, in fact, quite a nice thing. It was a charity opportunity that was organised by an employee within Accenture, raising money for VSO, which is the charity, I guess, that changed my life, I would say, quite openly. And we, again, could come to that kind of catalyst. But it was interesting to go up that mountain, and that would be, I'd say, one of my first experiences of really going from A to B as slowly as possible. So when you're going up Kilimanjaro, you spend about 5.5 days going up and about a day and a half going back down. And the reason being, you need to get your body to acclimatize for the altitude. And I remember this was, I think it was about 2011 or 12, but walking slowly, disconnected from technology, speaking to people you wouldn't otherwise have maybe spent much time speaking to, having the chance to reflect, having the chance to look around and enjoy the nature, was really quite a profound experience. And no, I didn't beat anybody up with my Kung Fu background while I was doing it.
I'm glad to hear that you saw some cultural separation in what you were doing. That's wonderful. And certainly the idea of slowing down is one that we use in our thinking about career disruption and reflection. And it's one of my coaching mantras, slowing down in order to speed up. So we've got some attunement from the very beginning in terms of the ways we think. That's wonderful. So tell us a little bit about how your career progressed. You started as an engineer at BP, but you're certainly not in that world at all at this point. So tell us the story that got you not just from A to B, but from A to B and to some letters quite far down the alphabet.
Yes, indeed, via PQRZ or whatever.
Absolutely.
I'd love to. I don't know whether there's many people can give you a potted history of their career where they deliberately went from there and then that got them to the next level, and it was all beautifully planned. My career's been very, very emergent, and I have no regrets from that perspective. I left the little Scottish island where I grew up. I studied in Glasgow, as you say, went into engineering because I really didn't have many other ideas as to what I should do at the time, and discovered that engineering really wasn't my passion or what I was best at. I escaped out via an MBA, and then, like many people, followed the bright lights of London and the sort of lure of the late 90s, mid 90s rat race, if you will, all the trappings of success of fast cars and gold cards in the luggage and business class flights. These were what I was told, or what we believed at the time, would make us successful, would make us happy, would make us
I remember it well.
wealthy. You maybe remember it well. And on one level, I suppose I was ticking these boxes, and life was pretty good, but there was something a little bit missing. I couldn't quite put my finger on it until this VSO, which I referred to before, Voluntary Service Overseas. They had an article that was penned, I believe, by Peter Mandelson, of all people, who was a ex-VSO volunteer. And he penned an article in the Financial Times, March 1999, remember it well. And it was about VSO not wanting to go fundraising from corporates. They needed access to corporate skills. So they wanted to partner with big corporates, borrow their people, not for 2 years, which was the standard VSO placement, but we'll borrow you for 6 to 12 months. And this was a eureka moment for me. This was the kind of missing link, if you will. It's funny that people think that their life will be, when they look back, it will be things like, birth of a child, or getting married, or death of a parent, all of these big things in life that will mark your journey. For me, it's, I think, sometimes the smaller, seemingly insignificant moments, and these cubic centimeters of chance that I think it was Joseph Jaworski that described it as this cubic centimeter of chance that you either seize or you ignore. I decided to grab this article, ripped it out, called up VSO, and then within a year found myself in the Balkans as a volunteer, business volunteer.
This was not at the most stable time in the Balkans either, was it?
Well, when is there a stable time in the Balkans? But you're absolutely right. It was really, I went to a place which is now called Northern Macedonia, that's been changing its name a little bit recently, but it was just after the Kosovo crisis, and this country borders Kosovo, and there had been all the dreadful things going on in Bosnia and Kosovo, and the risk was that Macedonia, Northern Macedonia, was going to be to face the same fate, and luckily it largely avoided it, although 2000 to 2001, while I was there as a volunteer working with small businesses, helping them get access to credit, helping to try and train sometimes women entrepreneurs, I was more motivated than I'd ever been in my life. I was on a 90+% salary discount, but incredibly motivated, and that really got me thinking at this time, and how much more could I get done if I had my normal team of people around about me. Why were companies like Accenture conspicuous by their absence there? None of the other big consultancies were there. Consultants tended to be, older, mostly men, working on large day rates, and frankly, not having the impact that you would want them to have. So it was a wake-up call for me, and I started to think, how much more, could we do as a company than just hand out a few volunteers here and there? Could there be a business model that would allow us to have an impact in parts of the world where we wouldn't normally work, and working with organizations we wouldn't normally work with? And that was the genesis of what became known as Accenture Development Partnerships.
Superb. So tell me a little bit more about the path that you took to convince people high up in Accenture to run with your project, and to assist you and support you in what you needed to do to turn the whole consulting model upside down on its head.
It's kind of funny. There's no probably right and wrong way, and I know you've been reading the book that I wrote that we'll maybe talk a little bit more about, but I had been spending, again, this is maybe another example of the deceleration time that we've been alluding to, but life was slow. I'd finished up doing a very high-paced, high-pressure job, and literally that finished on a Friday, and I found myself in the Balkans the following Monday and doing this role that I've described. But there were long winter evenings. There was a space to think and reflect and pause. And I've been thinking about, what could a business model look like? Maybe if I was happy on a 90% reduction as a volunteer, perhaps people would give up a proportion of their salary. perhaps we could get Accenture not to make profit on a certain type of work. Not that I have an issue with companies making profit, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And profit comes in many forms as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be pounds and dollars. And maybe we could get charities to buy a service rather than expect it to be handed out, which isn't really sustainable or scalable. So this was this turning the model on its head. And to answer your question, how do you convince the leadership? You could do 50 pages of PowerPoint. You could do a large financial model in Excel. I remember on my way home from Macedonia, just sitting in a cafe. It was in Thessalonica. I flew via Thessaloniki in Greece, and just typed a fake press article using storytelling, if you will, to talk about what this would look like. What would it be if our chairman was launching in Davos 1 or 2 years in the future, a non-profit social enterprise business? And in a couple of pages, you can really get across. It was probably 90% fiction, 10% using some facts and names that were real. And it seemed to capture the imagination of my then sponsor, the person who had sponsored the VSO relationship, who arranged a meeting with the chairman himself, Sir Vernon Ellis, as he's now called. And I found myself at a breakfast meeting with these senior leaders. I wasn't even a partner at that time. I was a manager in the consulting business, and found myself in this crucial breakfast where I was trying to back up the article, the story. And luckily, they bought into it. I think with hindsight and the discussions with Sir Vernon afterwards, he said that what really got his attention here was this guy, strange bald Scotsman, coming in saying, I want to half my salary. And I think these other people will. Normally, he was having people banging the desk, wanting more money or wanting different terms and conditions. So caught his imagination with this technique. So that's the technique I used.
Fantastic. So convincing one conversation at a time, but creating pretty significant conversations when they were happening. Excellent.
Trying to.
So what would be the highlights of the ADP as it developed over the years? You did indeed get the funding, you got the traction, you got people in, both as clients and as consultants, to do the work very much in the vein that you had the vision of. If you had to pick a couple of real highlights from the time that you spent building and then growing that business, what would you tell us about?
There were many. There really were. I'm just as I hear you describe this thing, there's something jarring with me, which is this notion that this was a one man or one person band at all. I make it very clear in the book that yes, I had the idea. I put it out there. I suppose got the leadership to buy in, but then it was like a lightning rod for talent in the firm. So many people helped, even at the feasibility study stage. People, some of the best performers in the firm would start to gravitate towards that. And I think that's not unique to Accenture. I think that there's a yearning in the corporate world for people wanting this notion of purpose, wanting meaning in their job. So I was able to cherry pick some great people to support me. So that was working with these great people was super. On projects as well, and so going to the field, as we called it, going to projects on the ground and seeing where our skills could really be making a difference. The odd time I managed to get one of the leaders to come with me, so that was probably a highlight when a new leader took over from Sir Vernon, and we had some changes in the baton of leadership, which has its problems actually in terms of having to get the buy-in over and over again. But my new sponsor was a Mark Foster, who I had expected to get for a day on one of his travels somewhere. He came for a week. Wow. In, I believe it was about 2007. And we went to see the nurses training program in Kenya, where we were using e-learning platforms. We went to South Africa, the Eastern Cape, and looked at what we were doing with the UNDP there, and having dinners with the team where they would see these leaders, and the leaders would hear firsthand of the experiences that employees were having, how it was the best project they'd done in the firm, why they maybe had joined the firm with a view to doing a project because they could get this opportunity, which was music to my ears. It supported the business case, the business rationale for us as doing this. And maybe the pinnacle, I would say, the high watermark was 10 years in, I was invited to do a presentation to the board. I owe this, I would say, to Sir Mark Moody Stewart, who was at the time on the board of Accenture and had been something of a mentor, actually, very kindly in his spare time over quite a few years. Why, I don't quite know, but he's just a generous man and gave of his wisdom. And he convinced the board that they should have a slot to hear about what we'd done our first 10 years in. And I more or less put a one page in front of the board that was our scorecard of what we'd done, and $250 million worth of services in 80 countries around the world, and all the work we'd done post the tsunami in Banda Aceh, post the earthquake in Haiti, how many tens of thousands of consulting days of our employees and how many thousands of people we'd involved, and the reductions in attrition and increases in engagement, all on one page. And it was a very rewarding day, but I'm sure you're going to come to it. The wheels were due to come off, but I would say it was a rewarding journey, but it wasn't all plain sailing.
I'm sure it wasn't. Let's just talk for a minute about the overlap between those transitions that people were making internally at Accenture and some of the work we've done. We've got a long and one of our favorite chapters in our book, which we call Profit to Purpose, and it looks at 4 or 5 leaders who at some point made a move from profit to purpose-driven work of some kind. And we looked at some of the factors that led to success or more discomfort, and they were quite numerous. So I'm wondering, how did you prepare those consultants that were coming to the program and planning to go off to somewhere that would challenge them on every front? How did you make sure that you were finding the right people and preparing them in the right way and preventing disasters?
Well, as you say, we wanted to avoid disasters, and that was certainly something that was taxing some of the leadership, or one of the challenges we had was, are we putting people into harm's way? And there's nowhere, as we found out over the last few years, that's totally safe. Sure. But we were first of all targeting the higher performers in Accenture. So this was seen as a reward. This was seen as a retention tool for high performers. Absolutely. It was that sort of screening initially. Then we would take people, and everyone got a couple of days of training beforehand, and we used external trainers, not your typical business trainers, but Andrew or Evelyn were trainers from the development sector who, apart from helping them understand how to be safe and look after themselves in that very different context, they were also making sure that people understood that this wasn't going to be a one-way, you give your skills to grateful people on the ground in these countries, but much more of a two-way learning opportunity, that they would be learning as much as they would be giving. And it was a degree of humbleness and humility brought into consultants that you wouldn't normally necessarily associate with consultants.
Absolutely, a big challenge.
But they were all giving up a proportion of their salary, and we did recognize that they were there because they wanted to be there. So we also had if you will, some education to be done on the client side, that these were strong people, high-performing people. They might not know about the context of that particular developing country. That's what the clients would provide. But they did know about supply chain or logistics. They did know about strategy. They did know about technology. And it was that marrying, that notion of the outcomes being co-created between the teams on the ground, and sometimes the teams having complementary skills, a cross-section of different skills. So, and then we worked with our security people as well to make sure that they weren't put in harm's way.
Extraordinary. That's beautiful. Thank you. By contrast, some countries, if we were to pick a couple countries, companies even, if we were to pick a couple like GSK or Microsoft, have programs where they second their employees to NGO projects. It's not exactly the same model. But what's your perspective on these, and what do you think leading edge companies should be doing as they go forward in terms of how they shape the world that they want?
It's interesting, actually, with the GSK program, for example, you talk about, it's called the Pulse program. I remember, I can't remember exactly the year it started, but we were brought into their headquarters in Brentford, and I remember supporting workshops where they were thinking through how they would do this. And they went for a slightly different model, working in a consulting model where people are more rotational, is different from people in position-based roles. And theirs was more of a traditional volunteering program. I don't believe they were charging clients for their time. I was also approached by competitors like IBM, who set up a similar program. Again, they were more offering volunteers into projects, not on a commercial model. The difference I think that we were trying to do was to make this a self-sustaining, scalable social business, one that washed its face financially, and that had business benefits as well as impact, so that it was somewhat harder, therefore. But the parallels, I would say, are that what we are giving people that is so important is an opportunity to step out of the cocoons that we and I had been living in up until this point, to take people away, give them not just an international experience, which has always been good for leadership development, but it was cross-sectoral, cross-cultural in many cases. And you take people away and give them that immersion. And funnily enough, they start to have interesting ideas, innovative ideas. GSK, I know, one of their volunteers had been in the Kibera slum in Kenya, and funnily enough had a brainwave about low-cost diagnostics, something that was obvious to him, but it wasn't until you took that person and placed them in this different environment that these innovations, these ideas came up. So there's something, I think, very powerful for companies in exposing people to such environments, such challenges. Yes, maybe slowing them down a bit, this recurring theme of deceleration. I'm rather obsessed with at the moment. But that is a way to develop and nurture and awaken the entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial innovators and change makers in your organization. It certainly was the catalyst for the idea I had, but I think there's many, many more. And how you capture that and bottle that and nurture that is, I think, a real leadership challenge or opportunity.
Absolutely. That's superb. If you were able to pick out one statistic that you can remember and share with us about retention or engagement or something like that, what could you say that would, I mean, we're convinced, so you're preaching to the choir direct to us, but we hope the audience will be full of leaders who want to emulate this in some way. Give us one or two interesting statistics.
I'll give you two that that always come to mind in these kind of questions. The first one was on retention. Many years into the program, INSEAD, the business school, who actually wrote a business school teaching case around entrepreneurship on what we were doing. But as part of that study into what we were doing and interviewing our leaders, they offered to do some research. They were interested, can we do some research on the business benefits and the retention benefits? And they estimated that high performer attrition was reduced by 32% through the program. So we were able to hang on. Now, what the value of that actually is in dollars terms, I can't tell you, but it was expensive to train people in Accenture. It was expensive to recruit people.
Yeah.
Very expensive when these good people, particularly the good people, move on. So that for me was a very powerful statistic. And we probably could have done more with that internally to help our license to operate and the business case. And the other stat is one that I get told since having left in 2016, but as of last year or the year before, I know that there is over 50,000 people, 50,000 of Accenture staff are on the interest stroke waiting list to do projects. They can't use anything like that number every year. They'll use, I think 500 or 600 at the moment, which is a decent number, but the latent interest that there is in Accenture, but I think this applies to other companies as well, this latent interest amongst the millennials, if you will, that are already 80% of the workforce in consulting human capital companies like consultancies. If 80% of your workforce are desperate for this kind of idea, and the use of the cliche, it's not about making a fortune, it's about making a difference. And that's what they're yearning for. So the winning companies, the successful companies of the future, I think will be the ones that crack the code on how they can offer employees, yes, a decent, fair salary and terms and conditions, but that meaning in their roles that so many of them are lacking.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a really strongly
surprises me. And,
you know, I mean, it's just an amazing number. So,
well,
in fact, you can
show me
only
another
put
company.
one in 100 on that waiting list can go through a year. Quite amazing.
Which shows you the latent growth. But as I sometimes say, I don't know of another company that's got that number of people queuing up to take a voluntary salary reduction and work on the other side of the world. It's counterintuitive, right?
Absolutely. No, extraordinary. So let's then talk about your exit from Accenture and from that program. It's it's an interesting story. What would you like to share with us?
That I haven't shared in 72,000 words in a book. It's a fairly personal story, but I'm very happy to share it because it's something I want to speak up about. So far I've talked about the successes and the highlights and what have been going well, and it sounds like it was all a walk in the park. I won't exactly know what happened. I certainly was under a bit of pressure. There were new leadership. You know, I was having to convince, you know, for the third or fourth time, a new set of leaders coming in. I talk about the corporate immune system, which is this sort of invisible force of antibodies that start to attack anything that looks like it's not making maximum profit next quarter. So that's cultural things, it's performance management processes, it's hurdle rates of return. All of that stuff makes it quite hard. So while I was getting probably a disproportionate amount of the credit when things were going well, a disproportionate amount of the proverbial you know what when it hits the fan. And late 2014, I went away for a retreat, really to recharge. I took a holiday and then was at a retreat in India. Came back with a fever. The fever triggered a sort of manic episode. I can't tell you that it didn't actually at the time feel unpleasant. It was some sort of drugs-induced episode, or like an ayahuasca trip caused by natural causes, whatever. I wouldn't know, but the result was that I didn't exit Accenture. I sort of stumbled out ungracefully via a week in a psychiatric hospital in Glasgow. I was back in Scotland visiting friends and found myself in this place, which, you know, me, someone who loved his job, had come from a very fortunate, happy family upbringing, had enough money, you know, mental health issues, you know, I didn't expect to find myself in there. And I can look back and thankfully have not had any repercussions, and there had been nothing before it. So it was a relatively short-lived thing. So I can sort of look back at it as being a positive catalyst in my life to other things. But I definitely felt that I needed to speak up about this experience, as I am doing now, to strangers. If we don't break taboos around mental health, if everyone just keeps quiet about these things, particularly at more senior levels in companies, then it will always remain a taboo subject. But at the same time, I'm saying, yes, I'm standing up and recounting this happened to me. I didn't expect it. You know, there is an issue, there is a crisis, and we know disengagement, burnout, the levels of anxiety and depression in business is terrible. But companies shouldn't see these sort of short, sort of sticking plaster solutions as being okay. We're going to, we'll allow a bit more time off, or we'll offer massages at the desk, or a yoga class once a week. Or for me, these are missing the point. Business, I think, needs to fundamentally take a hard look at itself, what it does, how it does it, who it's serving, and until there is this fundamental rethink, I don't think we will have happily engaged good places to work. And at the moment, we see this mental health crisis as a failure of individuals to adapt, or I wasn't strong enough to cut it in this environment. I wasn't, resilient enough. No, these are just symptoms of a broken system. So in the book, I'm trying to hold the mirror up to the system and say, it's actually the system that's crazy. It's the organizations that have the mental health issue, not necessarily the individuals working within them. They are responding to a system that has lost its way.
Indeed. So one of the things that I think you've been talking about around this broken system, and let's stop making it taboo area, is this idea of be the change you want to see in your company. You did a rather impressive TED talk about this a little while back.
Long time
What
ago,
would be
2013 actually. So before the wheels come off.
Time goes fast, indeed. But what's your advice to individuals and professionals in reference to this? How would you sit down over a coffee with somebody who wants to make a change, who's struggling or striving or dreaming of something better and happier and all those things that we logically aspire to, but maybe don't allow ourselves to peek above the parapet most of the time? What advice would you give to somebody in that situation?
Yes, it seems there's something ironic about the guy who finds himself, who tries to drive change in a company and lands himself in hospital giving advice to anyone. So maybe I can give advice on the basis
but in fairness, that was several years after the inception of the change.
Exactly. The good news is that whereas in certainly the early days of what we were trying to do, I'm thinking of 2001 to right through that decade, I would say there was the wind was in our faces. This corporate immune system that I mentioned, the notion of business having a purpose. We weren't even in the early stages of corporate social responsibility. Not that I'm a massive fan of that. Sustainability wasn't being talked about, let alone shared value and things. In 2020 and beyond, it's quite accepted that business should be talking about purpose. And you talk about moving from profit to purpose. Hopefully we can have both profit and purpose, or profits as being an outcome of a business that is addressing has a social and environmental purpose. And I believe there's huge value in addressing these problems, untapped value for business. And so my advice is that there are networks, support networks, such as the League of Intrapreneurs, the Circle of Intrapreneurs. Aspen has its First Movers Fellowship. So this intrapreneurship notion has really got some momentum. You're not alone. I sometimes describe the League of Intrapreneurs as something like an Alcoholics Anonymous for these change makers in companies. It was very lonely when Nick Hughes, for example, who you may never have heard of, and many people won't have heard of, but Nick Hughes had this crazy idea that the mobile phone could be a bank account for unbanked people in Kenya. It morphed into M-Pesa, not a CSR initiative, Vodafone, but a huge new line of business in financial services, financial inclusion. Lonely place to be. And when you speak to people like him, it wasn't plain sailing to get that off the ground, no matter whether the corporate history has been rewritten as a fantastic kind of corporate innovation initiative. It wasn't easy for Miriam Sadivi, another favorite example of mine. She gave herself the job title Social Mission Director of Lifebuoy Soap. She worked in Unilever. She had a PhD in hand washing and hygiene. She didn't go into the UN like her parents. She went into business, followed her heart, followed her dream, and wanted to touch 5 billion lives through behavior change around hygiene. And well, we all know at the moment just how important hygiene and hand washing is, even in the northern countries, let alone developing economies. And I think she'll say, she's just got a book actually has just come out, Miriam, an amazing woman, and she's had positive contagion into other brands, and giving many brands, not just in Unilever, but many other brands, a mission. It was a tough old job in the early stages doing these things. But now I would say, especially in the current crisis, we're seeing in the last few months that the rules are being encouraged to be broken, with the sort of hamster wheel having sort of slowed down ground to a halt, some might say, and businesses not having this commercial quarter by quarter imperative, you're seeing great innovations endorsed by the leadership. Innovations that you would have been laughed at if you'd suggested them. Could you imagine being in a car company and suggesting that you made ventilators, or an H&M fashion brand suggesting you made surgical masks? Ridiculous ideas, but yet there are fantastic innovations that I think have come about partly by the normal hierarchies having been broken down, people being given the space and the time to reflect and be innovative in their jobs. So it's probably a long answer to your question around entrepreneurs, but we've shown it's possible for COVID. There are 17 other sustainable development goals out there, from climate change to how we feed and nourish the next billion on the planet, and clean energy, access to quality education, access to healthcare. These are opportunities for businesses in partnership with other businesses, in partnership with NGOs, but these are the dreams of entrepreneurs waiting to be brought into reality through business models. And so I would say, have the courage as a leader these days. And that's not a job title. I'm not thinking, leader can come at 25, 35, whatever. But the courage is to stand up for what you believe in, follow your heart, and speak up, even maybe if the rest of the herd is going in a different direction.
That's truly inspiring. Thank you. So you've alluded throughout the conversation to a slowing down, and we've agreed that we like the idea. You're doing something very tangible about it. You've created and are developing a business decelerator on the Isle of Bute in Scotland, where you grew up. Tell us more about that.
Well, again, it's a very emergent idea. It wasn't really planned in any way, but it also wasn't conceived just on the back of this current crisis. I can tell you very honestly that I have nothing to do with the crisis. This is not a marketing ploy by me. It's a sort of irony that having talked in 2018 about this notion that you alluded to, that the idea that we can drive innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, as I would say, by slowing people down. This idea you can go faster by starting off by slowing down. Festina lenti, I think, is the Latin term meaning hasten slowly. I believe that, and partly through what I've described around the mental health experience, partly through this belief that there is a lot of untapped value on the table waiting to be innovated within companies, that there's a belief that if we're running at 100 miles an hour, if the hamster wheel is spinning so quickly that people are almost like, permanently semi-distracted, there's like a collective, attention deficit disorder in business that means that we are missing these opportunities. And a farm came available on the island, a derelict farm. I wanted to do something in the community in Scotland and particularly on this island. And I thought, well, I could marry my passion for business change and entrepreneurship with providing a physical space on this beautiful island where I could not only expose people to this transformative and creative power of nature and community, but also bring in artists, musicians, improv comedians, all the people that sort of nurture the right brain of business people. We're very, very good in MBAs and in business training programs to get the analytical left brain very honed, very good. But I sometimes feel the right brain gets atrophied and tends to atrophy and not be utilized as much as possible. So that's essentially what the decelerator is about. It's not just there's no shortage of places you can go for spas and chill out and retreat places. This is an innovation program, a playground, if you will, for the creatives, the high performing creatives in your company to have the chance to experiment and be exposed to these kind of stimulating conditions.
Wonderful. And as I understand, when you say creatives, you don't just mean the marketing people. You mean anybody who is willing and able to create ideas, novelty, innovation, whatever it might be.
You're spot on. And one of the things that really attracts me to this notion of entrepreneurship, at the end of the day, the labels aren't too important, whether it's entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, extrapreneurship. The notion that anybody at any level in a firm more likely, I would say, lower down the firm. Frankly, you're less vested in this broken system.
Absolutely.
But in any department, you can be in accounts, you could be in marketing, you could be a brand manager, as I've described, you could be in any part of a business. I think innovation can come bottom up and inside out from any of these places. It just needs to be released in some way. I sometimes ask clients or business leaders, senior people that I speak to, would they hire an Elon Musk if a 25-year-old Musk or a 25-year-old Branson or the female equivalent came into their office? And of course the answer would be, of course you would. But there are probably plenty of these types of profiles in the company. They may have burnt out, they may already have left, they may be about to leave. How do you retain these people, and how do you awaken these people and tap into that business value from your internal innovators, your internal change agents? We are not easy to manage. You could ask my ex-bosses about that. Sometimes describe ourselves as two-part change maker, one-part troublemaker. That's the intrapreneur. But finding ways of managing and attracting and retaining that kind of talent, I think, is going to be a key success factor of high-performing companies in the future.
Absolutely, and that absolutely aligns with our thinking about not just sticking clones into newly available positions. So we look forward to hearing a lot more. Or clowns, there's that, unless they're creative clowns, but that's another. We'll meet them at your decelerator.
I wouldn't be, I guess, bringing some. I wouldn't be, I guess, bringing some clowns in as trainers into our stuff. Laughter and creativity, and we do the improv comedy. But
yes,
I would say there's too many clowns on the other side of. Let's not go there.
Let's not. So we're coming towards the end of our time. Is there anything else that you feel you want to toot your own horn about?
More than I've been doing already.
You've done a splendid job.
Tooting again, I come back to this point of whatever I've described to you has been the result of being lucky enough to have a fabulous team around about me. That happened in Accenture Development Partnerships, and I'm finding it happening with this decelerator concept. Is that it? Ideas have their time, and ideas seem to attract the right kind of resources around them. So this is very much being co-created. I very much hope some people will be able to come to events when we're able to get together physically.
Absolutely, yes.
In the meantime, we're doing some virtual things. It's amazing just how much you can actually do virtually. And I'm looking to have residencies as well, a bit like that Bellagio retreat center that the Rockefeller Foundation has in the Italian lakes. It's almost like a Bellagio of Scotland, a place that people will be able to go, whether there's a actual retreat happening or not, to this thing. And the last thing I would say, we haven't talked so much about the book, but I have alluded to it. But the reason for writing the book was not just to stand up and be counted on mental health. I'd say that's 20% of it. 80% of it is really it's a business book disguised as a story. So it's a story that I hope might inspire, budding entrepreneurs and talking very honestly and candidly about the successes we had, but also about the failures and things I would do differently. But it's all couched in, goodies and baddies and ups and downs. And I'm hoping it's a digestible read. Whereas many other business books, I think, are. It
truly is. It is a rocking story in all kinds of ways.
That's very kind.
And it's easy to find on Amazon or wherever you want. So for those who are interested, it's called The Intrapreneur: Confessions of a Corporate Insurgent. And there's a rather generous and lovely introduction by Paul Polman, the CEO of Unilever, as well. So all in all, a very good read. And something of an inspiration in terms of a vision for a world in which business is doing more, I think is one way to summarize it.
When you write a book when you write a book that's set in the context of businessmen in a psychiatric hospital, I think you have a lot of license to fly kites as to how business can be. So I had some fun in sort of sharing ideas that had been in technical papers and putting them out there in layman's terms. But Yeah, so thank you for that plug for the book. I would say one bit of advice: if people are struggling to understand my Scottish accent from this interview, don't buy the audio book. Would be my one bit of advice.
I'm sure they've done just fine in understanding you today. I'm gonna thank you at this stage for sharing so candidly, so openly. It's been fun. It's been inspiring. There's a lot to think about for all of us, whether we're individual career changers, whether we're leaders of teams or organizations, whether we're just people who need to have different ways of inspiring ourselves and moving forward in life and in our work. You've given a great deal for us to think about, and I'm super grateful to you for having come along and played with us today.
Thanks for the opportunity and invite.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.